that the family and I kind of grew up in. My father was not just in the Air Force, but he was an active combat bomber flyer. And my mother, for the spot, was, a true mother at home. She used to teach at school where I was learning in Delhi for some part of her years. So that diversity kind of, uh, got instilled in me right from the beginning, both in terms of developing new relationship, new friends, dealing with all sorts of communities, and of course, seeing the diversity that we all know India is about. Just fast forward, went through different K through 12 schools as a result of that, and then settled in for my undergraduation at St. Stephen's College in Delhi. My I studied in India and grew up in India up until my undergraduation, and then I came to the U.S. like most of you immigrants, for my advanced kind of studies over here. I'll switch to the career path in just a moment. In my family, my nuclear family is all here in the U.S. Two sisters, and my parents live in Southern California. And then my immediate family is my wife, who's an attorney here in Dallas, and then we have three boys who are now kind of young men in their early 20s. God has been kind, and we've had the support of many friends. Just like y'all. Just turning and wrapping up on this thread is turning a little bit to the career path. I'd never seen a computer. Well, let me take that back. I actually first saw a computer in my second grade, maybe, in Delhi, and this was Jagdeep. You mentioned IBM, and in some sense, through my life, I've had 3 incidents with IBM. And a school trip took us to what used to be the for those of you who are familiar with Delhi, what used to be the International Doll Museum and IDM, or International Data Machines or something, before IBM and Coca-Cola multinationals got thrown out of India in the 1970s, and the assets got acquired by this company called IDM. Anyway, there we were taken on a school trip where an IBM computer played the tune of the Indian national anthem. That's the first time I saw a computer. So we're talking about early 70s. And after that, I never got to see a computer. There were no computers in India. And when I did some work in India before I moved here, my managers in a company where I did a little bit of work told me that I was too careless and I couldn't handle computers. So that was quite interesting. Nevertheless, what life had in store for me was to come to the US and study my master's in computer science, which I did in Mississippi, and then did my research at University of California, Berkeley. And I feel privileged to have done my research in TCP/IP. And I'll speak to this a little bit more when we get to kind of the technology portion of the discussion. And when I got my first career job, which was with Motorola in Austin, Texas, I ended up designing and deploying what at that time was the second largest TCP/IP network of the world. So in that sense, to put it in perspective with contemporary times, I've been not just a witness, but a practitioner to what I regard as perhaps the first bookend of my career in deploying, one of the most significant technology infrastructures of this world, and that is TCP/IP, that led to the birth of the internet and the web. And perhaps as I close down the last few innings of my career, in let's say the next 5-10 years or whatever it's going to be, um, I'm enjoying certain opportunities to install kind of the next new infrastructure of our times that we all think it is going to be, and that is decentralized distributed ledger technologies and blockchain. So really important kind of bookends into my career, and everything else was just a quick kind of a dream. Back to you, Jagdeep.
No, I think that was great. I mean, it's interesting. When I was doing my engineering, we were reading TCP/IP, and the browser back in the day was a Mosaic browser, right? So that's where internet started for me. Let's go to distributed ledger, right? So if we were to level set everyone on blockchain versus distributed ledger, what would be a basic definition that you would say describes that? Before you go, can I make one sort of housekeeping announcement? Like, don't turn your mics off. If you have questions, ask questions as we go along. Turn your cameras on, be interactive. This is not a Jagdeep and Gurvinder show. So make it as interactive and ask questions.
Sorry. Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I'll keep an eye also on the chat room over here. Otherwise, Jagdeep, just cue me in. The way to look at blockchain networks is, there are multiple ways depending on how you scope a blockchain, discussion or a solution. The first thing, just to level set, and sorry if I'm being elementary for those of you who are kind of pros over here already. The first thing to keep in mind is not to think of blockchain as a technology. There is no such thing as the blockchain. There's no one blockchain. It's a pattern. It's a pattern, just like web architectures and three-tiered architectures and client-server architectures are patterns of technologies. And the blockchain pattern, as distinct from ledger technologies, I'll make the distinction in just a moment a little bit clearer. Its implementations is in certain technologies. Of course, the most common and the grandfather of all is Bitcoin. And I'll come back to expound on that also in a little bit in a moment. The other big grandfather or father is Ethereum. Most of you had not just heard of these, but are invested in these. And beyond that, there are multiple others, which in my prediction 3 years ago, I was thinking that the market would consolidate and it'll settle on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 major blockchain platforms. But it didn't so. And in fact, there's ever more innovation than I've seen in the last 7 years that I've been in this space. My entry into blockchain was around 2013 and 2014. Me and a few others during our work at IBM actually pioneered the use of blockchain in enterprise. So more directly to Jagdeep's question, I'd like you to think of blockchain, and I'll pause for questions in just a moment. I'd like you to think of blockchain as bringing an ecosystem together, similar to how ERP systems brought functions within an enterprise together. So what ERP is, so this is kind of an enterprise slanted definition of blockchain. So what ERP systems did to enterprises internally is what blockchain is doing to ecosystems across enterprises. The other slant on describing blockchain is in terms of crypto economies and crypto tokens, the best example of which is Bitcoin and also Ethereum. And you begin to look at those technologies as those networks actually as a kind of a technology system, right? Where there is consensus and protocol, and that, by the way, is one of the main distinctions between blockchain versus decentral, just pure DLT technologies. The other layer of a Bitcoin or an Ethereum system, the first one being the underlying protocol, the other is it's a it's a it's a it's an economic system. It's a crypto economic system, which revolves around the demand, supply, and monetary policies of the token. And then thirdly, it's a governance. It's a system of governance. So if you step back and think about the constituent technologies that have gone into blockchain, they are cryptography, database, and peer-to-peer. And individually, these technologies are not new. They've existed for decades. In fact, TCP/IP and the internet intrinsically was designed to be a peer-to-peer network. Now, of course, massive centralized properties like Facebook and Google situated on top of it, which made it centralized, which made it behave like centralized, including DNS and those kind of things. So it morphed into something quite different from what the original intention was. But individually, these technologies existed, but the perfect storm was in kind of bringing them all together. Is what has brought it to the level of disruption that we have the opportunities and challenges to kind of face with today. Let me just pause over there to see if there are questions in the chat, or otherwise let's invite them live over here.
Maybe I'll ask a quick question. Since you got into blockchain relatively early at 2013 and seen the evolution the last 8 years, what is your biggest learning so far? What made you get into it, and what did you learn so far?
Sunil, thanks for making the discussion kind of personal and focused. What got me into it is purely serendipity. And even though at that time I worked at IBM, I was the CTO for IBM's cloud and IoT business. Blockchain wasn't even part of the business. And then later on, it was added to my portfolio, and I covered North America for those three technologies. And this is a story very dear to my heart. So I'll just keep it very quick. We actually set out on a skunkworks project without any funding, just on our own, evening time, just like now, volunteer time, a few kind of technicians, and wanted to explore the next generation architecture for IoT. So it had nothing to do with blockchain. We did not even know the word.
Interesting. Okay, that's funny. And that's very interesting.
In an insulated company like IBM, which is like a word in itself. Yeah, and that was the exploration. That was the mission, and the goal was to come up with some kind of a white paper, technical paper, to share internally as well as externally on the hypotheses that the existing approach to IoT is using repurposed web-based technology, like 20-year technology, and it's not sustainable in multiple dimensions, scale, economics, security, just multiple dimensions. It just wasn't scalable to a world of billions of devices that the planet has never seen before. So we were very determined that we have to invent a new architecture rather than use web technology and extend it to IoT, which is how it's been done. Fast forward, and we stumbled into this thing called blockchain underneath of Bitcoin, the way I was describing it previously, and the epiphany was that wow, if you can send Bitcoins from A to B, and the transaction is negotiated into a consensus by decentralized entity on that network, right? Which is what kind of cryptocurrency Ethereum, Bitcoin are. let's not think of these as tokens. Let's think of these devices. Let's think of these nodes as devices, as IoT devices. Yeah, given there are constraints, there are resource and compute constraints on edge IoT devices. But now if you look at it as a decentralized model, and the use case we looked at was a smart home, that if my garage door can negotiate with my refrigerator in order to open it for, you know, a FedEx delivery or, you know, something like that, right? Or my washer and dryer, which are, you know, energy hungry, want to negotiate the use, want to autonomously mediate the use of electricity with my TV. We don't have this problem in US and advanced countries, but in many countries, you know, electricity is scarce. So you want to be careful what you turn on, and you want to watch the TV when you come back home, and when you go to sleep, you want the washer to turn on, those kind of things. So we got Samsung to partner. They have all these devices that I just mentioned, and basically implemented a proof based on Ethereum 0.5 and presented it at the CES in Vegas. And then one of the biggest talks I gave was the keynote at Samsung Developer Conference in Moscone, and things just kind of broke loose after that. It took 2 years to convince the IBM mothership that, hey, this is something meaningful, before it got added into the roadmap and became a separate business, and also launched the Hyperledger open source movement in parallel. So it was quite by serendipity.
Wow, that's quite a journey.
My attention has been on enterprise blockchain, but increasingly, and particularly after leaving IBM, it's on a little bit wider scale now. Sorry, I think I interrupted somebody.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, we could go to IoT and carry that conversation forward, given like the best use case for IoT that I see out there is these cars that are generating, you know, over 2 terabytes of data in a day. So those devices are acting as an IoT device. So, and you've done a lot of work with automotive manufacturers in Germany. So it'd be great to sort of see that conversation.
Okay, perfect. So I actually, you know, I didn't walk in with a deck, but I do have some slides which I figured might be useful to lean on. And perhaps, can you guys see my, Jagdeep, can you see my deck?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, let me see how to minimize the pictures here. So I'm not looking at the Zoom console, so just interrupt me if I miss something. Let me bring this into slideshow. So let me just level set for the benefit of everyone, just on maybe this basic slide about blockchain, a little bit more elaboration, Jagdeep, to your previous question, and then I'll jump into the automotive. How about that?
Sure.
So this is particularly for those of you who are kind of novices or the curious over here. So if you think about, you know, bringing an ecosystem of entities together, everybody has their own database, which is kind of by the you know, different icons in the diagram on the left. And in a blockchain environment, everybody has a replica of the same database, right? So just think about it of that way. But don't think of blockchain to be just another database. Storage and database is, you know, one piece of it, which is just like it is part of, you know, most technologies. But what is really different is that everybody has the same replica. So if you look at the sub bullets on the right side, and then the sharing can be private or public. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And everybody is on the same state. The problem is, you know, like in a supply chain or an inventory, you don't know who has what. Or think about a real estate transaction or buying a house. Think about a car registration. Think about title change. You know, those kind of things. Think about automotive records. Those kind of things. So how do you get everybody to the same state to recognize the truth in the data? And that requires a certain kind of a governance and a specific technique called consensus protocols. It's a whole field of specialty in itself. And that's why I don't want you to look at it as just another database. There are multiple other layers and of, you know, mechanisms which bring it to this common state. it's not easy for those of you who come from a computer science background. It's not as easy. The biggest and the classic challenge in decentralized distributed systems is how do you have state consistency in a scattered environment? If it's centralized, if it's a mainframe or otherwise centralized, it's not a concern. You have just one thing to deal with, and you can establish state over there. You can control it. There has to be an incentive mechanism on why these entities should participate, and there has to be decentralized governance, which is a little bit to the consensus part that I was talking about. I'll just kind of pause and go back to the main question that Jagdeep was asking. That kind of being a little level setting on blockchain. Now, if we look at this diagram, it kind of lends to a couple of points of elaboration. The rectangle. So on the left side is kind of the representative, both IoT as well as a decentralized environment, where you have toll authorities, you have title on the left, bottom left, you have digital wallets in the cars. I'll come to a video, kind of an example from Volvo or Jaguar in just a moment. Then you have kind of fleet movements, kind of where they are, location. You have ownership and custody. Then you have like ride sharing kind of things represented on the right side of the left portion of the picture. Now, the concept of blockchain, I won't get into the middle rectangle on kind of how blocks are added, but that's the idea of a blockchain, where each block is kind of a, let me just simplistically state, a function of the preceding block, and that's what kind of ties them and together indelibly. Kind of they get chained and they become immutable. But the main idea is around the rectangle over here. And particularly if you think about automotive, where a vehicle's persona can change from being a passenger vehicle during the day to a delivery vehicle, maybe in the evening or in between, a little bit of what Uber Eats and all is doing. It could be a ride-sharing vehicle, and then the vehicle could have a digital wallet, which pays for its transactions. And then it disrupts the insurance agency, because you now have a varying profile of risks depending on which persona the vehicle takes on and how it's used. The insurance underwriting on it will also change. You have digital title and asset transfers and liabilities associated with it. And then, of course, you have, toll and those kind of things. So when you think of this kind of an ecosystem, how do you manage the identity if a vehicle changes its persona from one to the other? Those are things that can be hashed onto a blockchain, and that way there is an indelible record of some of that. Let me just move over here, take you through a couple of slides, and then I'll pause. This is an example of a vehicle autonomously. We're all hearing about autonomous driving, but this is autonomous economics, right? We can't think of autonomous driving without thinking of about autonomous economics as well. Jagdeep, in fact, has a deeper specialty on this topic of payments. So, smart wallet example for parking and vehicle sharing. I think this example is from Jaguar. This is not the specific work that Digital Twin Labs has done. We've done work with Mercedes and Daimler in kind of planning their innovation through running hackathons for them in Europe. And that is kind of one example would be the use of blockchain and tokenization for prioritization and congestion management at intersections. So,
can I give you a background on the kind of things that we've done in this space and we've seen in the spaces? You sort of fast forward, let's say 10 years, and you're now at autonomous driving as well as shared vehicle economics, right? So no one owns a car, much like Uber, you ask for a car, the car shows up, you get in the car, and it takes you to work. At that point, while the car is yours or you're in the car, your insurance is being used and the tolls are being charged to you. So this persona or the digital twin, as the name is, there's a copy of this thing out there in the ether on the blockchain that gets personified to be, okay, Jagdeep's in the car and AAA is now the insurer of it, and his credit card should be charged for all his tolls. Then I get to work, I come out, and someone locally in San Francisco wants to go shopping, jumps into that car. There's no driver, there's nothing, but the Uber app or the Lyft app or Waymo app is controlling all of it. So the future that we sort of envisioned is with blockchain, you're able to not only move the car, the title of the car, the insurance of the car, the payments of the car, but your music preferences, right? Your seat settings are there, your temperature settings are there. So this whole car is personified as a digital aspect that moves with you as your profile moves in and out of it. And that's the type of work that Gurvinder's been doing with the OEMs out there.
Beautifully explained, Jagdeep. So this actually is a prototype that Jaguar has been testing in UK and other parts of Europe. So you tie your kind of digital wallet to the automated payments, in this case for parking and vehicle sharing purposes, and that's like the payout side, right? But there's also, like, the vehicle can earn money itself. And in fact, this incidentally was one of the concepts that we developed in the IBM Samsung smart home, example, that if I have a washer dryer in some countries, those are scarce, and somebody has it but the neighbors don't, or you can share it, like how long do they sit idle? Think about, like, Uberizing your washer and dryer in a closed community. But how do you negotiate the marketplace and the payment mechanisms for it, without making it invasive? So the vehicle can earn if it detects a pothole while it's driving. I mean, it's really, the driver's not doing anything special. It's all happening pretty much autonomously, and uploads it to the local city authorities. So the wallet is both spending as well as earning. So you begin to see what I describe as, not just the Internet of Things, but the economy of things. We can't think of the future in terms of technology. We have to think of the future in terms of the economics that surround these assets. So let me just pause over here. There are a bunch of other, I'll just kind of breeze through over here. Vehicle wallets, provenance and kind of supply chain, car ride and sharing, automotive digital history. Think about how you can get transparency and accuracy on the valuation of a vehicle if you have a complete history on it. By the way, 3D printing is another one. I have, here, let me show you. So on one of these automotive places, I can't see my camera, but hopefully you can see this little thing. This is a 3D printed kind of souvenir that the guys over there, the vendor over there, gave me. Is 3D printed. But the main point over here is that they didn't give me this other part. And they had a part which was a 3D printed condenser that goes into, not a condenser, a heat exchanger, a 3D printed heat exchanger that goes into a Mercedes. I mean, production level Mercedes. Why am I stressing on 3D printing? The reason I'm stressing on 3D printing is not just for the disruption in manufacturing, but when you get into 3D printing, you are basically dealing with software files. And now, how do you know that you're handling the right version of a file, that it's not being breached, who has custody of it, and so on and so forth? So you now have to have a complete provenance of that, of the file, of the software content behind the 3D printed parts. Otherwise, you don't know what kind of parts you're going to be printing. So let me just pause over there, and I'll come back to my kind of console, Zoom console over here, so I can begin to see you guys again.
Okay, we got a couple questions. I mean, I just want to say we started dropping some distributed ledger vocab in there with provenance and proof of work, and suddenly all of those things will be need their own definition. But so the first question we had was a Gagan saying how much of a focus is there on data privacy? And that's sort of the interesting thing with private versus public, maybe on the blockchain.
Yeah, so I'll just use that as a little bit of segue into that portion of the discussion as well. So Gagan, good question. When I started out, there was a clear distinction between private and public blockchains. 7 years into this life, to me, that distinction is superfluous. Here's what I mean. Private blockchains were started by enterprise blockchains, particularly by IBM. The work that me and literally 5 others did basically was the first use of blockchain in enterprise in the world ever. So that's why it made a lot of noise when we kind of stood up on the stage and beat our chest. But the focus was always towards private blockchain. The argument being that, hey, Mr. Enterprise, you don't want to get onto Ethereum, you don't want to even deal with Bitcoin, because Ethereum is this public thing and everybody can jump on, and everybody knows your suppliers' prices and that kind of stuff. So that's what kind of birthed the idea of a private blockchain. Now, it's important to have that distinction, at least back then, but where the maturity is now, the real distinction between private and public blockchain is one of privacy. So Gagan, that's to your question. How do I get supplier A who supplies me apples and supplier B who also supplies me apples, and I'm Walmart? How do I keep supplier A from seeing supplier B's prices? Okay, fine. If I even can hide the price, how do I even hide that supplier B is shipping 10,000 apples today and supplier A is shipping 5,000 apples today? Even knowing the volume, forget about the pricing, even knowing the volume is confidential information in B2B, enterprise to enterprise kind of transactions. So Hyperledger started doing a lot of work. Incidentally, you'll be surprised, some of the best work, well, let me hold this thought for later in just a moment. So Hyperledger started doing a lot of work in privacy. And there's something called state channels for those of you who want to get deeper into it, where basically a node or an entity can would be given permissions to subscribe to channel A and channel B, and then channel A and channel B can't necessarily see each other. So that's how you deal with having a buyer having 2 suppliers, and the suppliers on the same network and the suppliers can't see each other, okay? And then multiple other private blockchain networks were born. The other significant one is Corda from R3, more in the banking and financial services sector. But the main distinction was around privacy, and if public blockchains can close the gap, can innovate and close the gap around privacy, then there is a story to be told that there really isn't a distinction between the two. So the point I was holding on for now is the interesting background is that some of the early innovation of privacy in public blockchain networks, particularly Ethereum, believe it or not, came from a pornography implementation on Ethereum, something called Spank Chain, if I'm not mistaken. And there are a few guys who quit Consensus, the company, and they formed this company called. Now, when you're in the business of pornography, not that I'm an expert or any one of us is, privacy, you can imagine, is something that is really important. So some of the innovation around privacy in public blockchains first came from that experiment. Let me just call it an experiment. Then more recent work in zero knowledge proofs, we won't have time to get into that, but it's an area any of you, if you want to look at deeper, is gaining a lot of attention. Zero knowledge proof implementation still quite challenged is getting into it, is providing privacy on Ethereum public blockchains. So if let me just last comment over here. If you want to look deeper, there's some work being done by Baseline Protocol, driven by Microsoft, Consensus, EY, and a few other players, basically to bring privacy, enterprise-grade privacy at Ethereum. The last point, actually, just to kind of really round it off, what enterprises are looking at is now a two-tiered blockchain infrastructure, right? So you keep what is private at one tier, and the back end is that can be shared is more on public Ethereum kind of blockchain, which is more the shared information across the ecosystem. So I'll just kind of pause there, wrapping up that question. What else? Did that answer your question?
It does. It's a pretty interesting insight, actually, and seems like a catch-22 where we're trying to, put this technology into the mainstream and struggling on the privacy side, which is a struggle anyhow, even with the existing data. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.
It's a fun thing to do. I'm just going to drop the Block Explorer in there if anyone wants to just look at a certain address. So you may not get to the endpoint to know whose block address that is, but you can start looking at all the transactions that guy's been doing. So, I mean, if you want to have fun, just go to btc.com and start playing with some of these blocks and see who's been paying who. You don't really get to the end user, but it's good to look at those. One right up your alley, Gurvinder, is this one from Roop. Do you want to unmute yourself and just ask the question?
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, so I work in the automotive industry with Stellantis, formerly Fiat Chrysler. So I kind of piqued my interest there with those slides with the automotive stuff. So looking into the future of automotive is something I always enjoy doing. So I wanted to know what you kind of foresee that automotive manufacturers will have to do in the future in order to integrate blockchain. And do you think that in general, are they off to a good start at that, or are they lagging behind on those kind of things?
Yeah, they're lagging behind. And they're lagging behind not because they're not innovative. In fact, quite excitingly, automotive, as Roop, you know better, is one of the most exciting, innovative sectors right now. But I think they have to prioritize because a lot of the R&D is going into sensor technology, it's going into electric EV technology, it's going into autonomous driving technology. So blockchain is not, I wouldn't say it's at the top of the list in light of those priorities. And then the second point I will leave with you is I'll point you to something called the Mobile Mobile Open Blockchain Initiative. It's I believe the URL is dlt.mobi, M-O-B-I. Otherwise, just Google it up. In fact,
I'll drop it in there. It's dlt.mobi.
dlt.mobi. So in fact, Digital Twin Labs, my venture, was one of the co-founders. I'm not actively engaged over there. If there's any introduction, the founder and the CEO is a good friend of mine. I'm happy to make an introduction, anything useful to you. They are basically an open source, standards formation organization advancing blockchain in automotive. So I'd encourage you to look at the work they've done. BMW is the other OEM that has adopted a few things. The biggest use case around blockchain use is automotive has been for VIN numbers, VIN number identification. So identity is another use case by itself on blockchain. There's been a working group, and perhaps the most advanced working group at Mobi has been the one on VIN. Another blockchain, another working group they formed, if you're interested, you can jump into it, is one on supply chain. So that's the other use case, which is a little bit to what I was describing on provenance of parts, increasingly 3D parts, but all other parts as well. The use of that in blockchain. But that use case is not unique to automotive. because both in my experience, in my direct work, as well as broadly in the industry, supply chain use of blockchain is the single most adopted use case in enterprises. That's been in diamonds, for the global trade of diamonds, which I've implemented for one of the large diamond companies in Europe. And then for the tracking of global container shipment. So that's a logistics kind of a supply chain, and food, tracking of food and nutrition, something that I'm doing at the Gates Foundation. Walmart has also been in some of these areas for tracking of food and supply chain and blockchain, using blockchain. Roop, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, those are great thought starters there that I'll follow up on the resources as well.
Sure thing. What else do we have, Jagdeep, on questions? Let's knock those off first.
One was like, how is pandemic impacting, and what initiatives you think are going to be key to further the growth in this domain? So like blockchain, and how COVID has helped expedite it. I feel like digitization overall has been helped by COVID.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding correctly, if I'm hearing correctly, is the question about kind of COVID and blockchain?
Or how's the pandemic accelerating the adoption of blockchain?
I think the single, just quite directly to the pandemic situation, there's been an initiative for the use of blockchain and digital health passports. It's a very controversial area, and I've been in it actually directly myself from pretty much day one. Around the middle of last year, which was reasonably early in the pandemic, we formed just a volunteer group called the COVID Credentials Initiative. You can search that up. I think it's covidcreds.org or something, COVID Credentials Initiative. And basically it was just a convening body. I headed up one of the working groups. I'm still active a little bit peripherally now, to bring in, shore up what all experiments, proofs, POCs have been done by anybody in the world. We thought we'll get 40, 50 people. On the kickoff call, we had like 150 people, and the membership grew rapidly to like 400 or 500 people. On any typical call, there were like 50, 60 people. So that's been one use, and I think there were like 40, 50 demos that got submitted. Let me just fast forward. That initiative actually got merged into, for those of you who are more interested in this, got merged into what's called the Linux Public Health Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation. And got merged into that entity. And there are some deeper experts than I am on the topic of what's called DID, or decentralized identity, and also called VC, or verifiable credentials. These are deeper slices in the blockchain umbrella. Some of those experts are now participating at the World Health Organization to come up with a standard for digital passport credentials for COVID on verifiable credentials, which is a specific kind of technology pattern in the blockchain umbrella. Let me just leave it over there, but only to caution you that there is a huge controversy on the other side of having any form of digital identity of people running the risk of mass surveillance. So there's quite a bit of pushback, even though some states have legislated it, but there's quite a bit of pushback that's happening right now. In fact, just last week, the WHO came up with not last week, like 2 days ago, came up with a latest announcement saying that they will not require COVID infection identification or vaccine identification for international travel kind of purposes, which was a very little bit unexpected, but very powerful pronouncement they came up with.
Okay, I think that we're getting to the end, and I want to get to most of these. So there's a question around, is there any way this can be exploited or for criminal activities or money laundering? and I think they're talking about blockchain in terms of transactions and BTCs.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'll be brief because Jagdeep, you can probably elaborate on that more than I can. There are arguments on both sides. Yes, there is, illicit kind of activities happening on, Bitcoin and other networks. But the argument has been that, hey, there's more of that happening, through cash. There's actually some level of traceability through cryptocurrency-based networks, which doesn't. There is no traceability through cash. And
yeah,
then the exact.
sorry.
Yeah, why don't you elaborate from there?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing in this space, at least from a fintech perspective or the DeFi perspective, has been that the on-ramps and off-ramps and how fiats get converted into crypto and how they get off of crypto back into fiat has now been regulated, right? So countries that want to do surveillance, like India and Thailand, have been the interesting countries that have blocked crypto altogether from their citizens. So you can't buy crypto in those countries. Everywhere else, they've regulated the KYC, AML, OFAC screening be done on the front end when someone buys crypto. So someone like Coinbase or Gemini would actually do that process before you come in. So it's pretty manageable. I wouldn't say that we have a bigger problem on crypto than we do in fiat. It's about the same amount of risk. Sorry, I'm just running through these now. The application of blockchain in robo-advisory or wealth management, it feels like it's another DeFi type of area.
Yeah, so not specific to robo-advisory, but broadly speaking to like chatbots and those kind of things. How do you know that it's the right chatbot that is responding, that is providing the service, is something that can be kind of, in a sense, attested and verified by keeping some kind of identification, and it's tracking on a blockchain network at the back. There's been some work that has been done in that area, just because of the proliferation of bots and those kind of things. So it is an active area. It's not in the main headlines, but it is an active area.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if there's a blockchain case for robo, but there's certainly a cloning and digital twin case for that, right? So if you know people like you're part of a cluster, there's a lot that could be done there. A Singh, you had two questions. Do you want to get off mute and ask those?
Hey, Jagdeep, can you hear me?
Yep. Hanji.
My question is for Gurvinder Singh and Jagdeep Singh. You can also jump in. Sir, let's say, and this is a conceptual question. Let's say you are given a power as a nation state would like to have it. How would you kill blockchain or distributed ledger? If you are given the task to kill it, how would you do that?
Well, one way is that the country completely bans it, right? So a huge population of the world doesn't have access to it, which kind of, diminishes its power. There has been a theory of, the 51% attack in proof of work kind of networks that could take over a blockchain network. There's also been a third argument, and then I'll give it to Jagdeep for anything else, of, a country like China, could come and generate just blank blocks onto a Bitcoin network and kind of take it down that way. So there have been some theories around that, but the truth so far 10 years into this has been nobody has really taken down the Bitcoin network. Nobody's actually even breached it. The breaches that have happened at exchange and smart contracts level, not at the core protocol level. Over to you, Jagdeep.
Just to follow up with that, what you just described would be a limiting factor for within a certain geographical region. But my question was, if you have to take it down globally, how would you do that? Is it possible?
I'm not sure I understood the question, but it's really not delimiting geographically because there is no notion of a geography in a decentralized network. The geography gets introduced only if a certain country, border sovereignty doesn't, permit its entry. That's the only thing that would kind of delimit it geographically.
I think when you say China can do something, that's sort of using a crypto attack type of nomenclature, where a rogue country goes and starts creating blocks and using up the chain, right? That's like doing a DNS on a domain type of idea.
Yeah. There's a YouTube very interesting video I would point you to. I think the guy's name is Mike Green. I could be mistaken. It's like do a search on YouTube for the biggest debate on Bitcoin between him and the other guy's name is Pomp, P-O-M-P. Yeah, I think it should come up in your search. It's pretty interesting to listen to the arguments.
Sorry, did you have another one?
My second question was, and let me talk from the other side because my questions are a little bit conceptual, not at the protocol level. How would blockchain diminish the power of a nation state?
I'll take a stab and then give it to Jagdeep. The power of a nation state in US is its dollar.
Oh, hold on. I'm not talking about the US, but in general, because this is the first time in the human history that money has been separated from state. And according to me, the state will come with all guns blazing. If that takes a real shape,
Right.
It goes to a high level.
It's first, we're making an assumption that a coin or a cryptocurrency is a form of legal tender, right? No country has yet said digital currency is a form of legal tender. What you're doing is you're converting a legal tender, which is the fiat of that country, into a crypto, and you're using it as a limited set of places that accept that crypto. So you cannot use a Bitcoin everywhere a dollar is accepted. You cannot use it everywhere, a rupee is accepted if India ever goes there. So to say that a crypto is a currency it's conceptually an investment. It could be a currency, but it's not a legal tender that's been recognized by anyone at this point. So I'm not sure that you can say that we've created a currency at the same level. If the Danish end up doing it or the Chinese end up doing it, where would People's Bank of China is doing right now? And the People Bank of China project is not even on the blockchain. They're thinking of a digital currency, going out with a digital currency. They're piloting it and they've been doing it for a while, but not on blockchain. So it'd be interesting to see when we get to a point where cryptocurrency replaces a legal tender of a country, and how do you differentiate that or bring it down? Does that make sense? And I think we're going into very conceptual, and I want to get to some of the other ones. Maybe we'll come back to yours. Is that cool?
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Amr was asking, there are so many crypto coins available, how to pick or own one. Are you asking us to, which one would you bet on, Gurvinder?
I'm not, I really am in this for the technology, and I'm a builder. I build systems. I'm not so much in it for the speculation or the investments, though I am invested. The whole DeFi space is very, very exciting. Let me just broadly leave it over there. I'm not a good advisor on investments.
Cool. Can we use blockchain to eliminate corruption in India? I don't know. I feel like some of the use cases you were talking about earlier, the ones that we've seen with Walmart trying to do with produce, right? Or authenticity, those could be used to solve some of the real problems on the ground. But systematic corruption is, I don't know if technology is an answer to that, regardless of what technology does.
No. So yeah, technology is never an answer to, stupidity.
Sorry, did we get everything? Guys, go off mute. Just ask questions. We're all
if you missed your question,
you're sticking around, then obviously you're interested. So anything else?
I think I answered Sarabjyot, your question a little bit. So it's really more in the parts for the supply chain side, not so much on the sales and the rides. And the dealer part. The sales one, a little bit towards title ownership. There's been some experimentation of the use of blockchain and title registration. In fact, I'm talking to some folks in France next week for that very use case. Yeah.
If you remember that chopped off Mustang we have in the One Visa Center, in the Visa Innovation Center, that was sort of going after that use case that Sergio was talking about, where you could, much like you buy a Tesla, you can buy a car on an iPad, put that title up in the blockchain, put buy insurance, tag it to that same block like you had shown in that document.
Mm-hmm.
So the funniest thing we used to talk about in this thing was like, if we get to the point where the cars are autonomous, you bought them, they're on the blockchain, and now you're not making your lease payments, can that car drive itself back to the dealer lot because you're delinquent on it, right? So in the future, we could get to the point where anyone can check the title, much like you would check credentials of my degree on blockchain by permission, right? So that's the one piece that we didn't really get to, is public versus private, permission versus non-permission. That's also part of the blockchain technology that enables a lot of these use cases that enable privacy, access for a certain period of time, and time to live tokens. So a lot of that is built into this protocol already.
Yeah, absolutely. Jagdeep, how much time do we have left?
We're over time, actually.
Okay, no, I'm fine on my end. But let me ground it this way, right? One of the takeaways, aside from the technology, that I'd like to leave the group over here with is a lot of this is grounded in certain very important fundamentals and actually economic literature. Whenever I try to understand some of these new waves of disruptions, and I've stewarded the industry in the last 4 or 5 major waves of technology disruption, I don't get the answers from technology. I get the answers from economics and sociology, actually. And if it's all one of the main fundamentals is about bringing transaction costs down, which is rooted, for those of you who are kind of students or otherwise closer to economics, which I'm not, incidentally. I'm a computer scientist by training. It's rooted in Ronald Coase's theory of the firms and transaction costs. So all that we are talking about, that Jagdeep's talking about, many of you are bringing the questions, is how do I bring the transaction cost of looking up the provenance of tracking a particular part and be able to do it in seconds? It used to take like 7-10 days to find out where a particular vegetable at Walmart came from which farm, right? Now, within a matter of seconds, you can scan a barcode or something and you'll know the entire history and the farmer's family, right? In fact, that whole story is becoming a narrative for consumer marketing and those kind of things in certain aspects, including diamonds, I might add. So how can I quickly look it up, including the cost of prediction, which combines blockchain with AI? The other main fundamental here is it's not the entities, but the functions that the entities provide. So I'll point you to the work by a guy called Doug North, who's a Nobel Prize laureate from earlier this decade, or 2012 or something, in economics. And his concept is this: that you can have functions without having entities. Right, so that's very powerful, that you can have functions without having entities. So it's a little bit like, banks are diminishing, but banking is not diminishing. So that distinction is really important between the physical entity that is providing the function and the actual function. The function is more important than the physical entity. So all these are grounded in economics and certain fundamentals which are really driving this disruption. Back to you, Jagdeep.
I don't know if you have another blog or book recommendation. Sergio was asking, I think you're trying to ask from a developer perspective, not from speculative investment in coins, but feel free to unmute or add to that question. But I think 101 blockchains is a good place. You can just go there and do some courses and get certified if you want to play with blockchain.
Yeah. If you go to Ethereum's website and Consensus's website, they have some very good early starters, just basic stuff on Ethereum, on blockchain, which is a little bit Ethereum kind of slanted, but it's very useful. Yeah, 101 blockchain is also the one I was going to point out.
Sandy is asking how or can it affect social or economic inequalities?
Yeah, very interesting question, Sandy. Jagdeep knows he and I, we are involved in certain, what are called, human-centric kind of initiatives and thinking. So there's some work that we looked at more from an analysis, not an implementation in the continent of Africa on, it actually goes back again to the use case of farmers access to capital in Africa, and I'm sure many other countries, including India, access to capital is a huge problem. And this is, I think, a part of the whole farmers protest movement in India as well. And in the Africa study, what we found out is that the problem was that the lenders, the financial institutions, didn't have enough data on credit worthiness of the farmers and didn't have transparency into the use of assets, meaning the farmland, the farm equipment, and those kind of things. So if you want to borrow, so many dollars or whatever equivalent to buy certain, tractors or farm equipment, that would be a problem if they don't have that kind of transparency. So the use of blockchain would help over there to provide the transparency to the credit lenders, provide more creditworthiness data, and prevent kind of market fractures, and thereby prevent economic inequality in this particular cases of not just farmers but the families around them. Sandy, that's a little bit of a teaser response to your question. There are other examples around social and economic inequality.
So I think I want to close off because we've gone 15 minutes over, but the idea of this talk was just to give an overview of blockchain, where it comes from, where it's headed, and the background behind it. This in itself could be a series of talks. It could be a whole course, but in itself, and then different aspects of it, like Bitcoin and investing and coins and how to create your own coin. Like we've gone from tokens to ICOs to now NFTs, all using the same basic concept of a tokenization that comes out of blockchain, right? So there's a whole different world out there. And if you guys have interest and if you want to set up some time, I think Gurvinder and I can sort of work on setting that up for people who are interested to go deeper and do something. But this was more for Udaan to just put this subject out there, put this vocabulary in our youth's mind so they start thinking about it, looking it up, and make them curious about it. Open to any other feedback you guys have. Did this help, not help? Like, did we confuse you even more? We left them speechless.
I think I confused them.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Gagan. I see some comments over there. So thank you, everybody. Jagdeep, a special thank you for taking all the time to coordinate, with me and others, and for inviting my participation. I'm so happy to learn about the organization, and to meet the group over here.
Thank you. I know it's late for you there, so appreciate you staying up. Totally. Thank you, guys. Look forward to talking to you guys in the next one, and feel free to email us if you have more questions or need insights. Good night.
Bye-bye.